Welcome to From Rome Info video. My name is Brother Alexis Pignola. I am the publisher-editor of FromRome.info. And I am making this video to make a special appeal for the assistance of the Ukraine. First, let me thank all the very generous souls, people of great compassion who responded to my previous appeal for my own personal needs. I have removed that appeal from the header of FromRome.info because you have been sufficiently generous to take care of my needs. But if there's one thing that has always saddened me about the apostolic works I do is that I find more benefactors willing to help me personally in my personal expenses than are willing to help me in my apostolic works, which is what the gospel obliges me to do. Yes, out of necessity, I must beg my things, what I personally need. But when I see people suffering and in need, since I don't have anything of my own, I'm very limited in what I can do. How many poor people have asked me for help when I had nothing to give them? And though this is not the essential posture of us friars, there are certain grave crises that come along that one cannot help but want to help. And in these things, the rule of St. Francis and the teaching of the Roman Pontiffs allow us to make special emergency undertake special endeavors when the need is great. And one of the greatest needs is the time of war. Now, I make this appeal to the silent majority, those who don't troll from Rome and are not irate. War does make people very emotional. It should. It's a terrible thing. And you have all kinds of emotions from it. But as disciples of Jesus Christ, our chief motion should be compassion for the innocent who are suffering. And not just the innocent on one side or the other. But there are certain wars where all the suffering of the innocents is on one side. Now, in World War I and World War II, we had many occasions where the forces on both sides committed atrocities and hurt innocents, and that was extremely sad and unfortunate. And when this does happen, it is deplorable, no matter who does it. But that doesn't change the justice of the war. The war is just or unjust on the basis of its causes, what brought it into being, although even a nation that is justly defend itself can start doing, or its armed forces or civilians can start doing unjust things. But that doesn't take away their right to defend themselves. Now, in all the histories of war, and people might wonder why I, a friar, or orders dedicated peace, know about war, but before I became a friar, I was a student of military history. It was one of my private fascinations. I read whole encyclopedias of military history from the dawn of history up into the modern times, and I studied in great detail the First and Second World Wars, from armaments to supplies to battles. And as a young person, I had the bad habit of playing video games, and I played video games for war games. I usually won against all my opponents. So I know a fair amount of things about tactics, only as an amateur. I never was in the military, though I come from a military family, and I was going to join the military, but I never had the health for it. So I decided to become a friar. And I am a man of peace. I prefer peace. And I would never advocate a war of aggression. But certain wars, defensive wars, we not only should not criticize, but we should support. And this is the teaching of the Apostolic See, who undertook 5 crusades that were actually led by papal legates. Now, the first 5 crusades, except the 4th, which failed in its vows and attacked the city of Constantinople against the mandate of the papal legate, were defensive wars because the Christians were being persecuted by various Islamic rulers in the Mideast, and the Catholics of Europe came to their defense, assisted in many occasions by even the Orthodox. The Byzantine Empire was in decline and they needed help. And it was actually the Patriarch of Jerusalem who asked the Roman Pontiff to intervene, the Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem. And this was 50 years after the Great Schism. So you see that even back then, the schism wasn't as ideologically a cause of mutual disdain as it is among many Catholics and Orthodox today. Even the Orthodox Byzantine emperor, whose patriarch was in schism from Rome, received the Crusaders. He had a bit of hesitation, but he assisted them in his own way in as much as he could. And he gave a great example, and so did the Crusaders. Some even pledged obedience to him, even though he wasn't in communion with the Apostolic See. And the Roman Pontiff did not fault them for that. Because in war, there are greater things at hand, and necessity requires doing things that we would not do in peacetime. So a defensive war, a war to defend Christians who are being persecuted unjustly, is a war that we can participate in and we can promote, and it's a thing of virtue to do so. It comes from the virtue of charity, lived to a heroic degree, because the greatest love you can show your neighbor is in wartime to save their lives. And that means in a defensive war, such as we have in the Russo-Ukrainian war on the Ukrainian side only, helping the Ukraine is a great act of charity. This has to do with defending Ukrainians. It has nothing to do with whether you agree or disagree with the vote that put Zelensky and his government in power. And it has nothing to do with the personal morality of Zelensky or anyone in the government, because since the war of aggression undertaken by Russia is unjust, all the actions to defend the Ukraine are just and virtuous when they follow the laws of war. This means that we can merit great things in the sight of God by helping Ukrainians defend themselves. And it also means we should not be indifferent and stand apart saying, it's not my war. So many people who began a month ago saying, not my war, are denying any atrocities are coming. So their real motivations is really excusing what Russia is doing. And as Christians, we cannot excuse a war of aggression. If you're really a person of peace, you have to take the part of the Ukraine, because a defensive war is a war to restore peace. And the Ukrainians could really, because of the violation of justice that Russia has perpetrated against them, undertake a war to conquer all of Russia if they wanted to. But that's not their goal. The goal is just to drive the Russians out of the territory. So they are proceeding in an extremely virtuous manner, much more virtuous than the Allies in the First or Second World War, who declared total war against their enemies and were willing to destroy their enemies completely, not just push them out of their territory. Now, many ask me as a Franciscan, what are you involved in? Why are you involved in this? But people have to understand that the Franciscan order is one of the first religious orders dedicated to the spiritual care of soldiers in wartime. Matter of fact, St. Francis himself received the grace of his vocation the night after he donated all his military equipment, including a sword and shield, to a poor nobleman who wasn't properly outfitted to go to war. See, St. Francis led a regiment of men in the war between Assisi and Perugia. Assisi lost that war, and St. Francis was captured and suffered great things and had a very bad health for 2.5 years afterwards, because he was basically starved in a cold, damp prison. But even after that, he was willing to go to war in the papal army against the German king, or at least the claimant to the German king, who wanted the throne of Naples. And it was having set out for that battle, fully armed in the best equipment, because his father was a rich cloth merchant, and he was so proud his son was going off to war, because he said he'll certainly come back as a knight or with some lands, and the Pope will certainly honor him, and my family will be getting ahead in this. That St. Francis was absolutely eager to go off to war. in the papal army. And he was headed on the road down to Apulia, that's in southern Italy, when he met along the way and befriended a poor knight who was of noble blood, but did not have armor fitting his state in life. And so great was St. Francis's compassion for his fellow soldier that he donated him all his equipment, which means he himself couldn't go off to war. He'd have to return home in shame and humiliation. And St. Francis preferred to be despised by men than to fail in fraternal charity to someone who was his superior, because he was a knight and a nobleman, and who was poor, and who didn't have the proper equipment to defend his life in war. And according to the false modern narrative about St. Francis did this because he was opposed to war, and God gave him a grace of vocation because he had renounced war and become a pacifist. That's completely false. You don't find that said in any chronicle about St. Francis. Before the Second Vatican Council, no one said that. Maybe some Marxists dared claim it. So that means the great vocation St. Francis had from God to found our order was a merit for having helped a soldier who needed proper equipment to go off and fight a just war. This is how great, in the sight of Jesus Christ, is the merit of those who help soldiers have the proper equipment to go off to war. Not just defensive equipment, even offensive equipment, if the war is just. And so this is why I'm in Poland in the commandery of the Ordo Militaris here, which is dedicated to St. Casimir, and promoting this kind of charity. And one of the appeals that Ordo Militaris is making is seeking donors to donate the equipment, not the guns or ammunition or knives, but just the survival equipment for soldiers who fight on behalf of the Ukraine, who many don't have the proper clothing or survival equipment or even body armor, or anti-ballistic helmet, so that doing justice in the war, they might have a better chance of survival. Now, as regards wars, pacifism is a common error today, so I have to say something about it. I think all of us agree that the police are a good institution and should defend us from criminals. If a band of marauding thieves or thugs were burning up your town, blowing up buildings, murdering men, women, and children, raping girls and women and boys, you would totally back the police having to go out there and shoot them dead. The forces of order, that is the police or the military, execute the authority God has given the state to punish the wicked. They are justices of the law. They have the right, in grave circumstances, to even judge and execute on the battlefield. That's not true of police. There's in most constitutions, they must arrest the guy, take him to jail, try not to kill him unless it's absolutely necessary because he's shooting back. But in war, that's not the case. In war, the soldier is empowered with full authority to kill his enemy unless he surrender. Even if his enemy is dying and hasn't surrendered. For example, a man who is half blown up but has a knife and is throwing it at you to injure you, and he's one of your enemies, you can shoot him dead even though he's gravely wounded. And that is not a sin. In fact, it's a virtue, because you must suppress his evil will to harm others, and you can do it no other way than by killing him. And this is a just killing. It is not against the gospel. It is not against Scripture. In fact, God commanded his people many occasions to fight wars against God's enemies in the Old Testament. Even St. Michael came down from heaven to defend Jerusalem and slew tens of thousands of troops in the army of Nebuchadnezzar in one night. So if an angel of God can kill men at God's instruction, because what they're doing is unjust, so can a soldier in a just war. And so helping him survive while he's working justice is a great merit because he's doing the will of God and he's punishing the wicked. And so supplying these men who are heroes and doing a truly heroic thing, risking their lives to liberate Ukraine and to save Ukrainians from these horrors is a great thing. And so we are making an appeal seeking donors for military kits. And now this is not cheap. It costs about $2,500 to equip a soldier with the proper equipment so he can be on the battlefield 24 hours a day in the bitter cold and have a good or a better chance of not being killed by gunfire. So he needs a full set of clothing. He needs cooking materials. He needs sanitary materials. He needs body armor, and he needs an anti-ballistic helmet. That costs about $2,500, at least here in Poland, where the prices are very reasonable for this sort of equipment. So our order is seeking funds for that, and I am making this video to ask the very generous of you and those who want to merit great things from God to donate a full military kit, which does not include guns or weapons of any kinds, not even a knife, to consider this kind of a donation at Easter time, because it is necessary, and our goal is to raise funds to at least equip 100 men. And this is a fundraiser that would then obviously require raising $250,000. So this is an unusual kind of a fundraiser. It's not going to happen pretty much again, but we not only do great merit, as I explained, this is something that's very prudent to do, because if Ukraine loses this war, there will be another war. And one nation after another will fall to this horrible genocidal army that wants to, as they have declared, make an empire from Vladivostok on the Pacific coast to Lisbon, Portugal. They have declared their intention of conquering and destroying every nation in Europe. Now, the nations in Europe don't all have Christian governments. Most of them don't. But this is the heartland of the Catholic faith. And I think nearly everyone listening to this video has ancestors from Europe. So this is something we also owe our ancestors and our distant relatives. So it's a good work. And I would ask all of you this Easter to think of a great work of charity you could do for Jesus Christ, who, like a warrior, descended from heaven and risked his all for our salvation. Men who risk themselves on the battlefield to defend the innocent are imitating Christ in the greatest possible way of perfection of charity. Not in the perfection of other virtues like we religious are obliged to do. They don't take vows of poverty, chastity, or obedience. But as Christ said, there is no greater love than to lay down your life for your friends, which is a classical Greek Hebraic phrase, meaning to put your life at risk, to put it on the table and risk it. And this is what soldiers do. And it is the teaching of the saints that men who undertake this profession and die in a just war receive the crown of martyrs. It's actually a teaching of Innocent III in his bull in the Second Crusade. So this is why I am here doing what I am, and this is why I made this appeal. For those of you who are able, consider this great act of charity, equipping one man or more men, depending how much God has blessed you, so he won't die on the battlefield, or at least if he's shot, he won't die from that. He'll only be injured, and his life could be saved at a hospital. And so he doesn't freeze at night, and so he has the equipment to live on the battlefield, not die of dysentery. And all these things are part of the kit, and that we include to the men. So thank you for listening to this appeal, and I wish you all a blessed and holy Easter as we meditate on all the things our Lord did, said, and suffered for us, as St. Francis says. God bless. Ave Maria.